Thank you for joining us for this edition of IT Connections, Martello's weekly series that keeps you connected to the IT tools and trends you need to be on top to ensure reliable remote collaboration and communication. My name is Sandra Holland from Martello, and I will be your host for today's talk. Our topic for discussion today is SCOM Reporting. SCOM reporting is often neglected due to lack of time, knowledge, or awareness. SCOM is a feature-rich system, and navigating through these details to produce meaningful reports can be discouraging at times, especially when reports turn out empty. With many stakeholders in the company requesting frequent reports to know basic metrics about the servers and capacity management, SCOM reporting is not something that can be ignored. Today, I have Bob Cornelison, a specialist in SCOM and Azure Monitor, and Justin from Martello on the call with me. Hello, Bob and Justin. How are you two today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Awesome, glad to hear it. So in this session, we are going to discuss how to get the most actionable data out of your SCOM reporting with best practices from these two industry experts. So let's dive right in. Bob, let's start with you. SCOM pulls in a ton of data, so it can be difficult to filter through the results. What are some of the best practices you recommend in creating actionable data and meaningful reports?
So, first of all, I would recommend to start using SCOM Reporting. As some of you might know, it's not always being used a lot, and there's actually a lot of information in there stored in SCOM which you can use. So first, think about what you actually need to know and report on for the business. So this is one of the important things. Think about if there's data in there which can help the SCOM admin to improve SCOM environment. This is another part of the story. So some of the best practices I'm thinking about are also around how to avoid empty reports. I have discussed some major points on this subject in a blog post series, which we have put online on the TopCo blog earlier this week. And we will continue to add some more entries there. And finally, a best practice would be to save your reports for later runs when you have built something useful, and schedule some of them if you know they are being asked for regularly.
Awesome. So with that being said, to get a little bit more specific, what are those most common reports that SCOM administrators are required to produce?
Right, so the most common reports, I would say, would be performance and availability statistics. So managers and auditors generally want to know more about the availability of their systems, especially if they are customer-based. And this can also be internal customers for high priority applications. Aside from that, there are often service level agreements there, or KPI for the application or the service or a machine, which it needs to comply to. There is much more data in the database, though, to work with for SCOM admins and system admins as well, which I will in part discuss in my blog post series. Therefore, I think the most common requested reports by the business have to do with KPI performance reports, usually for a few counters, and availability and SLA reports for services and applications.
Good to know. Justin, did you have anything to add to that?
So Bob, you mentioned at the beginning that it's something that's as a good recommendation to use SCOM reporting. From the experience I've had of connecting to a couple of customers, I tend to notice that SCOM reporting is a forgotten part of SCOM and tends to be sort of lumped, on the server somewhere and not really approached. And when they do approach it, they get really sort of worried because it doesn't work properly. Do you have like any best practices when, setting up that part with the planning ahead of the reports that you have to run from SCOM?
So usually I first go with, okay, what do we need to know? So what do we need to provide? Some counters there, probably, and some availability measures. And also just for the SCOM admins, because I feel like it needs to start with the SCOM admin first, only for a few basic reports, so they can actually test, what the performance of the SCOM environment itself would be. But also to pull in some very useful data and reports from there for the SCOM admins. And then from there, you actually get to learn how to create these and then make useful reports for the business.
Would you have a suggestion of a very useful report to set up straight away for SCOM admin? I'm thinking straight away computer availability or server availability. That's a quick and easy one, but
yeah,
maybe you have some others.
In SLAs, performance detail reports, operating system performance. So there are some very useful ones in the Windows operating system management pack and the Linux one as well. There are some more for the SCOM admins, I would say the data volume by management pack and the SCOM health check reports. They might be at the top as well. So those would be my first go-tos.
Well, since we're talking about the different types of reporting, Justin, can you explain to us the difference between a monitoring report and a business report, just to draw that clear visibility between the two?
Yeah, so the experience I have, as Bob's pointing out, for an admin is to go in and get those reports and set them up. And most of the examples that you've got there, I would say, is a very good sort of component monitoring report. Performance at a CPU level or a disk space, how that's going to have appeared is a very good solid report, but it tends to be used by the infrastructure and admin only. Reports can exist on a lot of things, but when we start talking about applications, application holders, then potentially that information is less important to start with in a report, and finding out how often the application has been available or usable, or how well the whole application itself is performing. So when we talk about an individual server or an individual CPU component on the server, that's less important when you're running an application like, let's say, SharePoint, which could be 17 different servers. One server having a problem versus the entire SharePoint experience for the business. That's a different style of report, of course. Still valuable. The admin from SharePoint still needs to know that server 1, 2, 3 out of his farm is causing problems, or could cause problems in the near future if not looked at. But SharePoint as a whole is being used by the business, right? So business style reports tend to start incorporating information from other data sources as well. So as you can see there, SCOM might not be able to give you a complete perspective of how SharePoint's being experienced by different parts of the company. Other tools within the company can do that, like the users themselves. I'm not calling users tools, don't get me wrong, so everyone's having a laugh there, but the tools used to measure users experience, APM tools out there, or more likely your service desk tool, like your ITSM tool. When people can't use an application, by nature they will start complaining. So tickets will be on the rise. That's a very good indicator of something's wrong. Potentially, those style of reports and grabbing that information and looking at it from different angles, start taking it to a much more complex layer, where you slice and dice the information a little bit more for the experience of the business. And in different KPIs and different SLA gets talked about at that stage. I notice a lot of the conversations I have with SCOM admins is it's all about the availability of the computer. But when we start talking about an application, and it becomes the availability of the application, and that might just be as simple as, is the web page available?
Yeah, very true. Very true. So a big issue we have when it comes to creating reports is empty reports. So what are some of the best ways to prevent these reports from coming up empty? Bob, did you want to get started on that?
Sure. So to be honest, many times the problem is going to be targeting. Targeting has to do with the class structure which SCOM actually depends on for all monitoring and performance collection. So to say it bluntly, if you request a SQL database free space counter and you ask this counter from a Linux website, you're not going to get an answer. Or it is like asking me how Sandra's weekend was, to say it in human terms, and keeping in mind she lives like 6,000 kilometers away from me. So, I don't know. So what's very important in SCOM is you must target your question to the object where the performance counter is collected from, or one of its parent objects. So Windows Computer often gets the job done. So other reasons why your report might be empty have to do with performance collection rules, which might be turned off by default, or has had an override to tune down the data collection. You can check this from performance views within the console or your dashboarding tool. It could also be that there's a problem with the SCOM data warehouse database, preventing the data from being put inside of the database or being processed correctly into the tables which the reports are looking at. Those are some of the common reasons, actually.
Okay. Justin, do you have any additional best practices to prevent empty reports from occurring?
So there's the other side of the report as well, just because empty can mean, right, I've got an amazing stack of information, but I can't answer the question that's been asked around the report. And I hear that from a lot of customers as well, right? So the, management will ask for what was the availability of the application as a good example. You know, and then a user has to dive through the report of all the servers, all the components, and try and grab a Excel sheet that could end up, you know, tabs and pages and columns on infinite big, just trying to work out, you know, it was down at this time on the server, but was the server actually physically down, or was it just a CPU issue or a memory issue? And you know, that's where a lot of people will struggle to actually fail to deliver a report, potentially, is, well, I don't have the data, right? Because you just get lost in the sea of. So as Bob mentions, you know, you have to really clearly grab what's you know, what's specifically important to that user, and conversations internally in the business happen a lot when we start doing it, and something we do with our SCOM integration in our tooling is we encourage those conversations, because we see a lot of people start out with the, I want to do the server, I want to show people that it's available and how long it's available, and I'm keeping it up in the air. And then when the business comes and goes, well, that's great, but you know, last week, Tuesday, no one could access the application and your report says it was running. So why is that? And then they have no answer because they don't have that in the report. So then, you know, they can't report the true facts then. And that's where a lot of businesses struggle with that. And, you know, external parties come in and fix that for them potentially. Or, you know, they have to go and look at other tooling. That's something we looked at, that is just getting the right model in there. And as Bob says, there's a lot of things you can monitor with SCOM. The more management packs you throw at it, the more you can run in a report. The danger is that putting too much in the report.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And there are so many reports that you can create for so many different stakeholders in the business. So with that being said, Bob, how can you use these reports to demonstrate to IT department, like how, sorry, let me rephrase that. How can you use these reports to demonstrate how IT departments should be investing in their IT?
Yes, so I think there are a few ways to use these. First of all, if you look at core performance reports, you could use them for capacity management, right? So you can discover machines which are underutilizing their assigned resources, or those which are often running into capacity issues for being just too busy for the assigned hardware to keep up. So you could also target the same reports to services or application groups within your SCOM environment. That way you can focus the capacity planning to each service specifically and determine if there are any reasons to adjust capacity planning for these, or use availability and SLA reports to check if there are any regular problems having to do with this specific application. This way you can target your efforts to each business service and improve. So what is important in this respect is that you have a sense of what a business service is made up of. And this is exactly the point for Justin. Either by, you know, creating a group of servers, which is usually what is being done at the first stage, in its most basic form to report on, or by extending that into a SCOM distributed applications, or even better, by using live maps. So you have to see, you know, this sea of servers in your data center not as a one whole thing. It's just a group of applications, and sometimes these applications are spread across a few servers to provide this service. So you want to target views and reports for each service separately.
I think a great example of that one is SQL. If you take that, so when I help a lot of customers employ live maps onto SCOM, or potentially just dashboarding on it, The natural mistake they do is build an application that supports SQL, and then they put the SQL server in there. And then I explained to them, well, if you drill down and have a look in our dashboard, you'll literally see that, SQL has an engine, and that engine runs multiple databases, and those databases report to different applications. So, reporting on how well that SQL server is doing is great for the SQL platform owner, not so good for the application owner, because if one of those databases falls out, his application looks like it's in trouble, but that's not the case, right? So he's going to be chasing a wild goose chase trying to figure out what the problem is, when potentially, someone else just went and switched the database off because he didn't need it anymore. And then SCOM just lights up like a Christmas tree saying the database isn't working. That's an example. I use that quite a lot for people. And it makes a lot more sense, because within SCOM, you build distributed applications. Most people will build groups using computers, as Bob mentioned. It takes a little bit more imagination or practice to start realizing you can do it with the actual physical discovered objects within the tree, where live maps is in a WYSIWYG format. So it's very easy for us to go in and say, well, click a button, expand, that's the database you're looking for, drag and drop that, and you care about that database. A good example is SCOM itself. You only care about the two major databases, data warehouse and operations database. Potentially after this conversation, you may start caring about the reporting database as well. So that's going to be added to a lot of services. I think that's the key that we have with a lot of people is that eye opener of, well, I've got a lot of information to go through just by looking at SCOM. I want to make it easy, grab the computer, but you make your life easier for reporting on the back end and for visualization by grabbing the exact components. And I think one of the other things that tracks into that is a lot of people get really disappointed when, they look at live maps I've built my service map and it's live and green, so let me run a report on this now. One of the key factors to take, and Bob mentioned it about, you can use reports to forecast resources as well, is there's a real-time report, which is what dashboards should be giving you. What's the current situation? There's a historical report, which is, well, it's being read now. Was it read last week? Did we have the same problem last week? How was that solved? Those are always good for troubleshooting. But then there's also, looking at the historical data and saying, is this a problem that is constantly growing and happening more often in my environment? That's a real good indicator of disk space. I think we discussed that last time we talked, Bob. Is a lot of people ask for, can you help me forecast when my resources are going to run out? Now, SCOM naturally doesn't have that built in, but if you use your thresholds correctly, you can start predicting that a lot better based on historical data that SCOM's grabbing from you. We tried working in the past with tools that could start predicting this, but we found that just the algorithms necessary to forecast were really complex, and we didn't get it right. Not enough to say that was worthwhile, because every application acts differently, right? So SCOM, for example, is going to be constantly filling the database up. Add another management pack, it takes a leap in how much more data it fills the database up. If you look at a narrow field of my report for the last month, that's going to look really scary. You add a management pack and all of a sudden you've doubled in the amount of data that's flowing in the database. But if you look at that over the year, that's not even a blip on the radar of data that SCOM grabs. That's the sort of where algorithms don't really help you in that level. But keeping an eye on, let's say, the most common problem based on your threshold, and seeing that doesn't come up repeatedly is a very good way of maintaining that, forecasting that's not going to be a problem in the future. Something that Live Maps does, and we've accelerated into the IQ SLA reports that we've got. So we took a hard look at the real time and looking at the history. So what IQ does is grab all of the notifications from all of the components in the service. And when you click on a time span, you can actually go back in a graph and you can see what alerts were at that level. And then you can start seeing which alert, commonly comes up, how often it comes up, and you can start seeing repeat counts and stuff like that instantly. So you start knowing, great for security is another, not just resources, but you can start seeing login attempts failing all the time and rapidly going, and you're being hit by a bot checker or just a password decryptor of some sort against the AD potentially. And that sort of stuff can come out of live reports and tooling that we've got as well.
Yeah, so shifting the conversation just a little bit here, SCOM has always been the go-to solution to monitor on-prem infrastructure, as we've been talking about. But now many businesses are actually moving to a hybrid solution or even a full cloud environment. Is there a concern that SCOM may be sunsetting? And if so, how are current SCOM users to modify the reporting while using Azure instead? So let's start with you, Bob. What are your thoughts on
All
this?
right. So yeah, one of my favorite questions here. I get to answer this one a lot. So let's first start with the first part of this question. Basically, the question is SCOM dead or not, right? So some people are just quite easy to say it that way. I can tell you that it's very much alive and very much supported. So I have very regular chats with Microsoft product team members for all of the System Center teams and mostly for the SCOM teams. And they are really working hard on new things with SCOM. So some things in SCOM or some bug fixes, but also real additions and changes to the products and the way it's being used. The current main version is 2019, which is supported up until 2029. But there will be a new version of SCOM coming with the next version of Windows, as far as we can tell. So, you know, there will be support for the coming maybe 15 years is what we are looking at. So there's no need to step away from SCOM. However, the world is turning more and more hybrid and cloudy, right? So most of the times, if they are existing companies, I think it's fair to say that we are looking at a hybrid solution and not a pure cloud solution, is what we can expect to see. So there has to be ways to monitor in a hybrid world. So I've done a few recorded presentations about this subject lately in monitoring in a hybrid world. You can just go ahead and find them on our website. SCOM can connect to the cloud services and pull in a nice amount of data, and you can report on those all the same as well. There will also be items in the cloud or more cloud native, which are more likely being monitored by Azure Monitor, as it is already. And they might be more suited to be monitored there. So reporting from the Azure Monitor log analytics system works differently from SCOM. So you have to have a different mindset and start in a different way to think about monitoring from there. So all of these monitoring, they basically depend on collecting a lot of data. So putting everything in the data lake and then running queries on top of it. Those queries are in Azure Monitor in the native language of KQL. Some queries are provided as examples and defaults, and the rest you have to create yourself. So this takes some time and effort. This is often used to create ad hoc insights or an overview on a live dashboard in Azure Monitor, or to generate alerts from, so get this counter and see if it's above 95% for 2 or 3 times a 5-minute interval, and then give me an alert. So it is going to take some time to really create some useful queries for more difficult situations there. It can be done, but you need to learn how to do it. What we see more often is that these queries that pull up the data you are interested in are used in Power BI. So you use Power BI to pull in that query and get the data and then generate more insights in a more human readable and acceptable format for viewing and analysis. Because you can just, take away some boxes or view your graphs in a different way. So this is a long answer to a complex world of hybrid monitoring. You will use SCOM to pull in data, but you will also start using Azure Monitor to pull in data and report on both. However, they are different, with both having different methods. And of course, the world is even more complex than this, because, well, these are not the only two tools that you have, of course.
Of course not, no. So when you're speaking with SCOM administrators, Bob, we know that they're
Mhm.
very attached to their tools. They're very familiar with what they're used to using. What is their number one concern about moving from SCOM to Azure?
Well, I think the concern is that they are different tools, and you need to learn new things in order to do something similar. Um, and as is with all of these things, you cannot expect Azure Monitor to be built the same as SCOM and act the same as SCOM. So it will never be the same, and it doesn't need to be either. It's just a shift of mindset. This is often more difficult than you think, because we get to hear this also when moving from other tools to SCOM. It has been the same story back then, right? So it will be always that way. So there is a learning curve there, and the views in the dashboards and reports will all be different. While you might be asking the same questions to different tools. What is important for the business is that you can somehow still connect the different tools, so you can still try to see part of the story come together in a joint dashboard and alerting space.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. So with Martello IQ, you're able to integrate Azure and expand your service map beyond just your SCOM data. So this means you're able to incorporate any data in your IT environment, which allows you to work proactively. So Justin, could you share with us some of the strategies IT managers can use to take a proactive approach to their network using IQ?
Yeah, so one of the scenarios that Bob just highlighted there is that a lot of people are scared of it, and you know, that's just IT admins. Business is scared of it as well, right? One of the things we focus on when we go into new projects is to ensure that we can at least copy or mimic their existing way of understanding the data through IQ, right? So we have two major ways to represent data that comes from multiple systems. So IQ essentially is, to coin a term from Bob, a data lake that pulls in data. We're not as big as the lakes that are sitting in Azure because they pull in a lot of data. What we do is we pull in specific data for a specific purpose, which is alerts, health states, and component CIs. And our purpose is then to, you know, grab monitoring data from the various monitoring tools and enable someone to see and visualize them in real time and then be able to act on them in real time. Not necessarily something that logs and counters are doing, that they're actually generating alerts, notifications that, hey, I've spotted this problem, you've broken this threshold, let me inform you of it. Now, if they do that 100,000 times, then, you know, you're probably going to need a tool to sit in between there to thin that out, and that's essentially where IQ comes in and sits on it. So we're a data lake sitting on the IT monitoring information, and to make this proactive, we then, you know, first adopt the dashboard that they have, and then start encouraging and supporting the customers into business service mapping, which is, you know, I've got a whole bunch of alerts. What do they actually mean to my business application? You know, because a whole bunch of alerts saying that your, I'll use the SharePoint example again, saying that a SharePoint server is down. And let's just take an example of one server from SCOM. So the disk space fills up on that server, which then in, you know, let's say SQL sitting on there for SharePoint for some reason, and some Windows services were on there, they're all going to start having problems instantly because they can't write anything away. CPU memory is probably going to start chunking up because they can't write anything away. So the whole computer lights up like a Christmas tree in SCOM, or even in Azure if it's being monitored. So you get a whole bunch of alerts kick out there. From a SharePoint experience, users can still use SharePoint, but from an admin's experience, he's just hit with 500 alerts potentially telling him he has a problem on that computer. If you put that in relativeness to the business application, then you know there's an infrastructure problem, it's a supporting device, and if you can reduce down the numbers of alerts to say, hey, you have that problem, and visually show him the list of 500, and he can go down into a timeline and say, okay, the first one potentially that was kicked off in the first minute is the disk full. So let me fix that, and then let's see if the other problems, you know, fix themselves. That makes them proactive at that level, which allows them to hit their SLAs, right? So that's what the reporting is about in the end, is being able to get there as fast as possible, and that's what IQ allows you to do. And an action can be simply, let me just clean the disk out, or an action can be, let me raise a ticket at help desk for a change on that server, potentially to, you know, increase its disk capacity in the cloud. So granted more disk space or more RAM or CPU, whatever the problem is to solve that. That's about perspective and knowing what the impact is of that sea of alerts that hit you. And as we expand in the numbers of tools that we have to monitor it, so as you shift workloads to Azure, your network monitoring tools become more important because making sure a user can get to those resources in Azure from whatever location he's allowed to. And your security tools to make sure that's open play a bigger role than potentially SCOM monitoring that server itself. So those, the need to have that all visualized together is where IQ comes in and allows teams to see what the other tools are saying, right? So if your network says you're going to have a problem in Amsterdam because the Amsterdam office device has an issue, you can see, users are going to be having a bad day that day, and potentially can be informed proactively from the business that you're looking into it, and saving the SharePoint team loads of, I know there's a problem email, I'm working on it, when they just can see that, it's a network device that's closed it down and not the disk space that's caused the issue. And it, as we shift towards Azure monitoring, I think some of the cool things in Azure monitoring is the APM abilities to test your applications in Azure are a lot more expensive, and they add that extra perspective, right? Which is SharePoint running? Can I test that to the levels that I want? And being able to test what an average user experiences already speeds up a lot of the business proactively to be ahead of problems when they hit there. And that's what IQ does, is that business service model, those perspectives we have. So you have end user application infrastructure is our golden simplified model that allows you to separate out the data, be it from your network monitoring tool, be it from your database monitoring tool, be it from your PowerShell script that's basically just testing if Bob can log in. Can all be aligned and associated into that. And then you start getting other types of reports like mean time to resolution and how many incidences are kicking up against the system, so that you can start looking globally at the business to say, that service that we shifted to Azure is actually being reduced in the numbers of incidences since we've done that. Great move. Let's move more services up into Azure. So you can really help the business proactively improve by just, giving them your benchmarks visibly to say, last year when we rented our own data center, didn't do so well. And now that we've got better resources, better upgrades, less worry, more fix in Azure, we're good with that as well. And we can prove it. Here's the benchmarks.
Yeah, and being able to show that is key, absolutely.
And you need to think about things in a different way as well, right? So if you're moving things to Azure, I know that the simplest way of doing things is lift and shift. So you take a VM and you put it in there. So it doesn't really matter where it's running, right? So you don't care more about the hardware. But in the end, the real cloud thought is that you are not running a VM anymore, right? So you don't care about the OS. You don't care about all of this CPU, memory, whatever else counters you have on the operating system or the machine. You just run a website or a database or a queue or whatever. So this is the only thing you are running at the end. And that links back again to what data do you need to know? What do you need to know of this application? If you are running it yourself, you probably need to know all different layers because you are supporting that. But in the end, if it's running in the cloud, especially in the public clouds, in that way, you don't care about all of those layers anymore because it's all somebody else's problem, and it's a black box. You just don't get that data. It's not there. So they only tell you, it's online and that's it. And what is the application performance, especially for websites and databases? That's more easily to view, of course.
Yeah, and all of this is key to the user experience, right? Well, we
Yes.
are up on our half hour, so I do want to be mindful of time. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Bob, Justin, thank you again for joining me for IT Connections today. I also want to thank everyone who took the time to listen, and we do look forward to seeing everybody next time.
It's been a pleasure. Till next time. Thanks, Bob.
Until next time. Thanks
Bye-bye.
again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.